Arrest him. He's trespassing on private property. I don't care if he claims he owns this ranch." The shrill voice of the neighborhood HOA president rang out as she waved the officers toward me. I was standing on land that had belonged to my family for generations, exhausted from a 12-hour drive, when flashing police lights greeted me instead of peace and quiet, and there she was, a blonde woman with a smug grin, certain she had already won. What this small-town tyrant didn't realize was that my office wall back in Washington displays photographs of more than 300 HOA presidents I've personally had prosecuted and sent to federal prison. My real profession? I lead the department with the power to shut down any HOA in the country with a single phone call. If you've ever faced an HOA nightmare, you'll understand. This woman had just made the greatest mistake of her life. My name is Nathan Hayes. For 15 years I've fought against the abuse of power in homeowners associations. Burned out from endless battles, I finally decided to retreat to my grandfather's ranch in Texas, hoping for some rest, solitude, and maybe a little fishing. Instead, I walked straight into a storm of corruption and long-buried grudges. The woman barking orders at the officer, Margaret Williams, self-proclaimed queen of the Willowbrook HOA, had apparently been waiting for this confrontation for decades, and she was about to discover why crossing the man in charge of national HOA oversight was the worst move she could ever make. When I turned into the ranch's gravel driveway, all I wanted was to collapse in the old farmhouse. But before I could even reach for my bag, a patrol car pulled in behind me, sirens breaking the quiet night. 2 officers stepped out cautiously, as though I were an intruder instead of a weary man coming home. "Sir, we had a report of suspicious activity and possible break-in," one officer said, his flashlight cutting across my face. I kept my hands visible. "There's been a mistake. This is my family's land. I'm Nathan Hayes. I can show you the deed. Just let me grab my phone." That's when Margaret made her dramatic entrance, striding across the yard in a stiff pantsuit that screamed official business. Even in the dark, her satisfaction was obvious. "Officers, thank you for arriving so quickly. As I told you on the phone, this man is trespassing on HOA-controlled property. We strictly forbid access after dark, and in my 15 years as president, I've never seen him before." She smiled at me the way a snake eyes a cornered mouse. Officer Rodriguez, the older of the two, shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am, he says this is his property." "Sir, do you have proof?" I pulled up the scanned deed on my phone. "The Hayes family has owned this land since 1947. My grandfather, William Hayes, bought it after returning from the war." Rodriguez checked the document and his expression softened. "Everything looks legitimate, Mr. Hayes. Sorry for the trouble." He turned to Margaret. "This property isn't under HOA jurisdiction." Her grin froze. But she wasn't done. She stepped closer, perfume mingling with bitterness. "Officer, you should know there are questions about the Hayes boundary claims. Recent surveys suggest this land may actually be common HOA ground." Rodriguez sighed. "That's a civil dispute, ma'am. Without a court order, we can't intervene." He tipped his hat at me. "Welcome home, Mr. Hayes." When the patrol cars left, Margaret's mask slipped. Her smile turned cold. She leaned in close. 20 years ago, your father ruined my family. We had plans to build a resort here, something grand, but William Hayes rallied the county against us. My father lost everything, his business, his reputation, even his will to live. And now it's your turn. You have 72 hours to reconsider staying here." After that, a broken bar. She paused, heels clicking on the gravel as she walked away. A broken bar. HOA rules can be very thorough. Only then did I fully understand my grandfather's warnings about the new neighbors. This wasn't just a fight over fences. It was a vendetta that had been festering for decades. And Margaret Williams had just declared war. What she didn't know, I wasn't just another homeowner. I knew her entire playbook, and I'd beaten it more times than I could count. When I opened the door that morning, my porch looked like a crime scene, blanketed in bright orange violation slips. I counted them once, then again, because my sleep-deprived brain couldn't quite believe the number. 47 separate violations. According to the notices, my grass was half an inch taller than regulations allowed. My mailbox, apparently, wasn't the approved shade on their color palette. My truck had broken curfew by sitting in the driveway overnight. Even my fence posts were cited for being a fraction too tall. But the one that nearly made me choke on my coffee was this visible coffee mug on porch, a $300 fine. Each slip was signed in Margaret's dramatic, looping handwriting, time-stamped throughout the night. The woman had clearly spent hours lurking around my property with a ruler, tape measure, and personal vendetta. At the bottom of the pile, I found an envelope that stood out. No official whole letterhead, just her personal stationery with my name scrawled on the front. Inside, her cursive was as sharp and smug as her tone. Mr. Hayes, I trust you've received our welcome package. The Willowbrook HOA enforces property standards with the utmost seriousness. Your grandfather may have been shielded by certain legal technicalities, but those protections ended with him. You have 70 hours to consider selling. I already have buyers prepared to pay above market value. Don't make this harder than it has to be. A.M. Weber. Beneath her initials, she added a note that made my stomach drop. P.S. Judge Harrison sent his regards. That name I recognized immediately. Harrison had appeared in at least 3 HOA corruption cases I'd reviewed in Washington, slippery enough to avoid prosecution every time, but dirty enough to stay on our radar. If Margaret was aligned with him, this wasn't just about property lines or old grudges. This was bigger. As I was still piecing it together, a nervous voice called to me from the fence line. A middle-aged woman waved me over, glancing around like she didn't want anyone to see. Mr. Hayes, I'm Linda, from next door. I'm sorry to intrude, but I saw the violations. You need to know what you're up against. She pressed a thick folder into my hands, her fingers trembling. Inside were 2 years' worth of carefully organized documents of photographs, violation slips, property maps, even a color-coded spreadsheet. It was a record of Margaret's reign of terror. She had a pattern, targeting anyone who stood against her, burying them under fines, legal fees, and harassment until they were forced to sell. One neighbor lost his home over a bird feeder, Linda whispered. 30 years he lived here, and then, just like that, gone. And it's not just the paperwork. Strange things happen. Pets disappear, gardens wither overnight, cars get vandalized, but nothing ever leads back to her. I thanked Linda, then spent hours combing through the evidence she'd given me. At the same time, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing angry messages from my boss in Washington. Margaret had already filed a complaint against me, accusing me of using my position to intimidate her hoe. The irony was almost poetic. I'd come here to escape work, and she'd practically dragged me into an official investigation against her. Then came a text from an unknown number. "Saw you talking to the Thompson woman." Nosy neighbors tend to have accidents. 46 hours left. By afternoon, I decided to test Margaret's patience. I strolled out to my so-called non-compliant mailbox, tape measure in hand, making sure she or anyone else could see me. It didn't take long. A golf cart buzzed down the street, carrying Margaret in what could only be described as her combat gear: pressed khakis, logo polo, and a visor that screamed self-importance. "Well, Mr. Hayes," she said sweetly, "I see you're already addressing your violations." "Wonderful. Though, just so you know, all changes require approval from the Architectural Committee. Next meeting is in 6 weeks. I straightened, forcing a calm smile. Actually, I was confirming that my mailbox is perfectly within regulation height. Funny thing about tape measures is they give different readings depending on who's holding them. Her smile stiffened. "Are you accusing me of falsifying violations?" "I'm not accusing," I replied evenly. "I'm stating your measurements are wrong." "Also curious, how exactly did you measure my grass at 2 in the morning? According to your timestamps, you were out here in the dark." Impressive eyesight. Her pleasant Section 8 cracked, and she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You think you are clever, don't you? Just like your father." Something in her tone made me stop cold. "What are you suggesting about my father?" Her laugh was short and venomous. "Oh, you really don't know, do you? That heart attack of his came right after our last big confrontation. Fighting the inevitable takes its toll. Weak hearts seem to run in your family. You should be careful, Nathan." Her words hit harder than I expected. My father's death had always been explained as sudden but natural. Now, for the first time, I wondered if there had been more to it. I forced myself to stay calm, even as anger burned in my chest. Margaret, I'll give you one chance. End this. Cancel these fake violations and stop the harassment, and maybe we can live side by side without problems. But if you don't a broken bar, I let the sentence hang, then I'll do what I do best. She laughed as she climbed into her golf cart, the sound sharp and mocking. And what's that? Go running to your government buddies. Judge Harrison can't wait for your lawsuit. He loves teaching outsiders a little lesson in Texas justice. As she drove away, I realized two things. First, this wasn't just petty hoe drama. It was bigger, dirtier, and deeply connected. Second, Margaret Williams had just slipped up. She'd threatened my family, revealed her judicial ally, and confirmed her corruption. In my world, that meant she'd shown her hand far too soon. I pulled out my phone and started dialing. If she wanted to play by hoe rules, then I'd show her why they used to call me the closer back in D.C. The next morning should have been peaceful, the kind of Texas sunrise that belongs on a postcard. Instead, I was staring at devastation. My grandmother's rose garden had been destroyed. Not wilted, not neglected, obliterated. The soil stank of industrial-strength herbicide, blackened and poisoned. And it wasn't random. Only the heirloom roses, the ones passed down from Ireland through my grandmother's hands, had been targeted. Every newer plant was untouched. Deputy Chin stood uncomfortably nearby, camera clicking as he took pictures. Mr. Hayes, I understand this is difficult, but unless we can prove who did it, this is just vandalism by an unknown party. I can file the report for your insurance. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. Margaret had known exactly where to strike. She'd turned this into something personal, cruel, and calculated. What she didn't know was that 3 hours after her threat, I had installed high-definition, night vision cameras linked straight to a cloud server. Back inside, I pulled up the footage. My hand shook with rage as the video played. At 3:17 a.m., clear as day, Robert Williams crept across my property carrying a spray tank. But the audio sealed it. Margaret's voice crackled through his phone. Just the old roses, Robert. And don't forget to wear the shoes I left out. 2 sizes bigger than yours. The precision, the premeditation, it made my stomach turn. This wasn't hoe nitpicking anymore. This was psychological warfare. I copied everything, then sat in my grandfather's old leather chair to think. The familiar scent of pipe tobacco clung to the wood, grounding me. I had choices: go back to the sheriff, who had already proven unwilling to challenge Margaret or Harrison, file a civil case, which would take months and give them time to tighten their grip, or a broken bar, fight them with their own playbook, the same strategy I'd perfected for years. My phone rang. Elena Martinez, a sharp attorney I'd worked with many times before. Nathan, please tell me you're not taking on a local hoe during your vacation, she said, half amused, half weary. Elena, they poisoned my grandmother's roses. This isn't work anymore. It's personal. She sighed heavily. Send me everything. But be careful. Small-town politics are nastier than anything in federal court. These people don't just protect their interests, they protect each other. I spent the next hour uploading files to her, all while trying not to look at the gaping hole outside where my grandmother's roses had once thrived. That's when a soft knock came at my back door. Dorothy Kim, an older neighbor with kind eyes, stood there holding a casserole dish. Thought you might not feel like cooking, she said gently, glancing toward the garden. Margaret's getting bolder. Usually she waits a week before escalating. I welcomed her in, grateful for the warmth of food and companionship. Dorothy had lived in Willowbrook far longer than Margaret. Your grandmother and I used to trade rose cuttings, she said, settling into a chair as though she'd been there 100 times before. Some of those Irish roses are still thriving in my greenhouse. You're welcome to take them back when you're ready. Her kindness nearly undid me. Thank you, Dorothy. That means more than I can say. She patted my hand. That's what real neighbors do, dear. Not like that Williams woman and her pack of enforcers. Over tea, I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. What do you know about Judge Harrison? Dorothy's expression darkened. Randall Harrison owns half the commercial real estate in this county. He and Margaret are thick as thieves. She drives property values into the dirt, and his shell companies scoop the land up cheap. Then they flip it into resorts and developments. Your ranch is 60 acres with highway access and natural springs? That's the prize they've been circling for years. The picture clicked into place. This wasn't just about revenge for some failed resort project 2 decades ago. This was organized theft, hidden behind HOA regulations and backed by a corrupt judge. "Dorothy, would you be willing to go on record?" I asked. She smiled faintly, but her eyes were hard. "At my age, what's the worst they can do?" "Yes, I'll testify." "But you'll need more than the word of an old woman to bring down people like Harrison." After she left, I returned to my computer and the security footage, my resolve sharpening. Margaret thought she was untouchable. She was about to learn otherwise. I went back through the security footage, this time digging deeper. What I found chilled me. For days, my land hadn't just been watched, it had been invaded. Robert Williams had crept across the property at midnight, measuring my fence posts like a thief with a ruler. Margaret herself had been caught taking photos from different angles, documenting everything with obsessive precision. And then there was someone new, a man in a suit I didn't recognize, inspecting boundary markers and jotting down notes like a surveyor on a mission. But it wasn't until I replayed a recording from 2 nights earlier that everything fell into place. My directional microphones had picked up a conversation carried on the night wind. Margaret's voice, sharp and smug. "Yes, Judge Harrison, the pressure is working. He'll break, just like his father did. Weak hearts run in that family." Then Harrison, his reply muffled but distinct enough. "Good. The buyers are impatient. If he doesn't sell within your timeline, we'll move forward with legal remedies. The emergency injunction is ready. A little creative interpretation of the county codes should handle it." Margaret laughed in response. "Grandfather clauses won't matter once we prove health and safety violations. That old septic system alone could justify condemning the property. Just make sure Robert doesn't leave evidence. We don't need another Tom Bradley situation raising questions." I sat frozen, then immediately saved the audio in multiple locations. What they just admitted to wasn't only harassment, it was conspiracy, judicial corruption, and maybe even murder if their comments about my father were more than cruel rhetoric. Still, I needed airtight proof, evidence that would leave no cracks for Harrison's influence to slip through. My phone buzzed, almost on cue. Another anonymous text, 24 hours left. "Nathan, I trust you've thought about our offer. The family cemetery looks peaceful, a broken bar. Your father certainly thought so." The threat was unmistakable, and it made my choice for me. I opened my laptop and began typing a message to my boss in Washington. "David Sona, quietly pull everything we have on Judge Randall Harrison and the Willowbrook HOA. Also, send me contact details for the FBI's Public Corruption Unit. This vacation has officially turned into an off-the-books case." If Margaret wanted to push me, she was about to discover why my nickname in Washington wasn't the closer by accident. The countdown to her so-called deadline ended not with silence, but with spectacle. Margaret had scheduled an emergency HOA meeting, timing it precisely to fall 3 days after her initial ultimatum. When I slipped into the crowded community center through the back door, the air was buzzing with tension. Margaret stood at the podium like a queen addressing her court, her board arrayed around her, and in the front row sat Judge Harrison, his very presence sending a warning. This wasn't just an HOA mod error, it was an orchestrated takedown backed by judicial muscle. "Thank you all for coming to this urgent meeting," Margaret began, her voice dripping with full concern. "We've uncovered alarming issues with the old Hayes property, numerous safety violations, structural problems, and even potential environmental hazards that endanger our entire neighborhood." She clicked a remote, and a slideshow flickered to life behind her sloppy, photoshopped images of my ranch. The fakes were so bad that several neighbors exchanged skeptical looks. "In just 3 days," she continued, "our architectural committee documented over 200 violations. Even worse, evidence suggests the property's outdated septic system may be contaminating groundwater. This is no longer about property value, it's about protecting the health of our children." From the back, I scanned the room. I could see the divide clearly. Her loyalists nodded vigorously, feeding on her words. The others sat stiff and uneasy, like prisoners waiting for sentencing. Linda Thompson caught my eye and gave me the smallest shake of her head a hold. Dorothy Kim sat stone still, fury etched into every line of her face. Despite Margaret's hastily posted no recording signs, I noticed several phones discreetly pointed at the stage. People wanted evidence. They were tired of whispers, so they wanted the truth captured. Margaret lifted her chin, pushing toward her climax. Mr. Nathan Hayes has refused every reasonable attempt we've made to resolve these issues. Instead, he's chosen to threaten board members, intimidate neighbors, and abuse his government position to bully our community. A broken bar. Margaret's voice rose over the crowd, her tone carefully measured to sound righteous. Mr. Hayes has abused his government position to harass our peaceful neighborhood. We cannot allow one man to destroy what we've all worked so hard to preserve. That was my moment. I stepped forward, letting each footfall echo in the hush that fell across the room. Dozens of eyes locked onto me as I made my way down the center aisle. Quite the performance, Margaret, I said evenly, although you seem to have overlooked the part where you poisoned my grandmother's roses. Or perhaps we should discuss the little midnight stroll your husband took across my property? The room erupted. Gasps, whispers, accusations murmured behind hands. Margaret's expression didn't falter, but her grip on the podium tightened so hard her knuckles widened. Mr. Hayes, you are out of order, she snapped. This meeting is for home members only. Leave now, or I'll have security escort you out. I smiled faintly and pulled a folder from inside my jacket with deliberate slowness. Actually, Section 12, Paragraph 4 of your own bylaws states that any property owner may attend and speak at emergency sessions. You should know that, Margareta. You wrote them yourself. Unless, of course, you'd like to admit you're breaking your own rules. Before she could answer, Judge Harrison rose from the front row. His presence demanded attention, and the weight of authority rolled off him like a storm cloud. Young man, he said coldly, sit down before you embarrass yourself further. The HOA has legitimate concerns about your property. Your combative attitude only confirms it. I have reviewed the violations personally, and they are valid. I turned to face him, masking the rage burning inside me. This was the man who might have helped kill my father. How curious, Judge Harrison, I said softly, my voice carrying across the room. Tell me, do you attend every HOA meeting, or only the ones where you stand to profit? The silence was absolute. Harrison's face flushed red, but before he could fire back, Margaret slammed her gavel. Enough of this circus, she barked. I call for an immediate vote on emergency action against the Hayes property liens for outstanding violations and a recommendation for county condemnation. Her board members echoed their seconds almost instantly. Too fast, too rehearsed. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Before you vote, I said, pulling out my phone, there's something everyone needs to hear. I connected it to the hall's sound system, a trick I'd tested earlier. The recording blasted through the speakers. Margaret and Judge Harrison plotting in detail, mocking my father's death, laughing about their scheme. The effect was immediate. The crowd exploded, voices shouting questions, neighbors demanding answers, angry fingers pointing toward the stage. Margaret's face drained of color. That's fake, she shouted over the uproar. He's abusing government resources to fabricate evidence. This is the harassment I warned you about. But the damage was done. Even her supporters exchanged uneasy looks, whispering to one another, glancing nervously at the judge. That's when Dorothy Kim stood up, her voice sliced through the clamor like a blade. I've lived here for 30 years. I've watched you tear this neighborhood apart, one family at a time. The Bradleys, the Johnsons, the Parks, all forced out so your judge friend could scoop up their land. We knew it wasn't right, but we were too scared to speak. I'm not afraid anymore. Her words lit a fire. Voices rose all around, a flood of long-buried grievances pouring into the open. Margaret pounded her gavel desperately until the room settled. Mr. Hayes, she said with icy calm, you throw around accusations without proof. But I do have proof. With a triumphant smile, she pulled a manila folder from her briefcase and spread it open. This is a notarized lien agreement. In 2003, William Hayes borrowed $50,000 from the HOA's reserve fund, with accrued interest and penalties. That debt now totals more than $300,000. The signature is authentic, the notary seal is valid, and by law, That debt passes to his heir. Nathan Hayeza, you owe this community $300,000. The silence that followed felt heavier than a stone. She had prepared this moment carefully. Copies circulated, and I saw the expressions shift, of sympathy fading, suspicion taking its place. I studied the document, my mind racing. It was a masterful forgery, flawless to an untrained eye. Elena had warned me they'd try something like this, but seeing it hit harder than expected. And then I saw it, the flaw. A tiny, damning mistake. I looked up at Margaret, smiling in a way that made her step back from the podium. Excellent forgery, Margaret. Truly impressive. But there's one problem. My father was deployed to Afghanistan from January 2003 through March 2004. Unless he signed this from Kandahar, I don't think this holds up. I turned toward the doors. Elena, a broken bar, would you care to join us now? And right on cue, Elena Martinez walked in, flanked by 2 FBI agents. The blood drained from Margaret's face. Margaret's composure shattered as Elena laid out the evidence. The notary whose seal you used wasn't even licensed until 2005. The paper stock you chose didn't exist until 2007. And Judge Harrison, well, his troubles are only just beginning. Gentlemen, I think it's time you make your arrests. The room dissolved into chaos as agents moved in. Margaret turned her gaze on me, eyes burning with venom. You think this is over? Tomorrow, check your mailbox. Nathan, my resignation isn't the only document I filed with the county. Even in handcuffs, she was still scheming. Her words lingered in my mind, gnawing at me as the FBI read her rights. This battle was far from finished. The next day should have felt like victory. Instead, it was a brutal reminder of how dangerous desperate enemies can be. I awoke to frozen bank accounts, a cease and desist order nailed to my front door, and 3 lawsuits of defamation, harassment, interference, all hitting at once. Harrison had escaped immediate arrest, but he hadn't wasted time. He'd weaponized his network overnight, unleashing the full weight of the Texas legal system to bury me before I could drag their corruption fully into the light. Nathan, this is bad. Elena's voice crackled over the phone as I stood in my kitchen, staring down the mountain of paperwork spread across my table. Harrison just filed for an emergency injunction. He claims your property is an imminent health hazard. The hearing's tomorrow, and guess who's presiding? His golfing buddy, Judge Thornton. If they succeed, they'll condemn your land. Any forced sale would go straight toward that fabricated debt. I poured myself coffee, hands trembling slightly as I processed the onslaught. It was a scorched earth strategy of the kind designed to obliterate lives completely. But in his fury, Harrison had underestimated me. He thought I was just another bureaucrat. He didn't know about the favors I had banked over 15 years or the phone call I was about to make. Elena, file an emergency motion to move this case to federal court. Diversity jurisdiction. Tie it to the ongoing FBI investigation. And call Davidson. Tell him it's time. We're triggering the nuclear option. While Elena set that in motion, I chose offense over defense. Harrison might have locked down my official accounts, but he hadn't touched my private reserve via funds stashed away in cryptocurrency, a safeguard I'd kept for years against exactly this kind of corruption. I shifted enough to cover immediate expenses and called Marcus Chen, a forensic accountant I trusted. Marcus treated fraud like a personal insult to math itself. Marcus, I need you to dismantle the Willowbrook Ranch hose books. Every deposit, every withdrawal, every ledger entry for the last 5 years. Focus on the periods before each foreclosure. He didn't hesitate. Send me the login credentials. Give me 6 hours. If there's dirt, I'll find it. While Marcus dug through the numbers, I drove to the county courthouse, not to contest the injunction of the fight would come later but to dig through public records, property sales, liens, foreclosures, 10 years worth of paper trails. The clerk, a jittery young man named Timothy, looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He stammered, "Sir, I was told certain files are sealed, pending investigation." Sweat dotted his forehead. I gave him a measured smile, drawing on years of battling obstructive bureaucrats. "Timothy, are you familiar with the Texas Public Information Act? Unless you have a specific court order, those files are public. Would you prefer I call the Attorney General's office to confirm?" He caved quickly. And what I found was damning: 23 foreclosures in a decade, every single one funneled into shell companies tied back to Harrison. The pattern was blatant, almost insulting to anyone who could count. But patterns weren't enough. I needed a smoking gun. That's when I spotted HEMA Robert Williams, slumped behind the wheel of his car in the courthouse parking lot, looking like his world had collapsed. His eyes were bloodshot, his hands trembling. My instincts screamed caution, but something told me this wasn't a trap. I approached slowly. "Robert," I said quietly, "I'm sorry for the way this unfolded. I know you were just following Margaret's orders." He let out a bitter laugh, heavy with decades of resentment. "Following orders? That's what I've been doing for 20 years." A broken bar. Robert's bitter laugh broke into words that spilled out like a dam bursting. 20 years, Nathan. 20 years of living with someone who only saw people as pawns or obstacles. You don't know what that's like. His hand shook as he pulled a small flash drive from his pocket and pressed it into my hand. "I've been recording her for years. At first, it was just to protect myself when she started threatening to destroy me if I ever left. But she got careless. She liked to brag when she was drinking about Harrison, the foreclosures, all of it." Then his voice dropped, raw and heavy. "There's something else. About your father. It wasn't stress that killed him. Margaret poisoned him, little by little, digitalis in his coffee whenever he stopped by the community center. She even had a name for it, her a heart attack special. Said no one could ever trace it afterward." The ground seemed to shift beneath me. My chest tightened as grief and fury clashed inside. My father hadn't died naturally. He'd been murdered, and his killer had been proud of it. "I'll testify," Robert whispered, his face pale. "I'll give you everything: the recordings, the documents in our safe, all of it." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed violently with messages from Marcus. "Jackpot. Call me now." When I did, his voice practically vibrated with excitement. "Nathan, they've been embezzling for years. Phantom contractors, fake vendor invoices, the works. And here's the best part: they slipped up recently. Margaret approved payments to a non-existent cleaning service. Guess who owned the shell corporation? Judge Harrison's wife. We're talking over $800,000 funneled out in 18 months. This isn't just fraud, it's RICO. Racketeering, conspiracy, fraud. And with Robert's testimony, murder." That evening, my phone rang from a blocked number. I didn't need caller ID to know who it was. "Nathan Hayes." Harrison's voice slid through the receiver, falsely calm. "You're playing a dangerous game." Margaret was reckless. "But me? I've been doing this for 3 decades. You don't know how deep this runs." I surprised him by laughing. "Judge Harrison, that's your problem. You've been playing petty dictator for so long. You've forgotten how the real world works. By tomorrow morning, the FBI, the IRS, and the Texas Attorney General will all have your financial records. Your empire is crumbling." The silence stretched, brittle and thin. When he finally spoke again, the swagger was gone. His voice had shrunk to a whisper. "What do you want?" "Justice for my father. Prison time for every one of you, and restitution for the families you destroyed. Non-negotiable." I hung up before he could answer and immediately dialed Elena. "We've got them." Robert's flipping, and Marcus uncovered enough financial crimes to make Enron look subtle. "Get this to the FBI fast." That night, sitting on my porch, I felt my father's presence with me. Tomorrow would be the final battle, but for the first time since this war began, I believed we would win. Their empire of corruption was about to collapse, brick by brick, and I intended to watch it fall. The following morning, the federal courthouse in Austin rose against the dawn like a bastion of justice, its limestone pillars glowing in the sunlight. Straightening my tie, I walked forward with Elena at my side and 2 FBI agents shadowing me. Inside, the air buzzed with tension. The case had drawn reporters from across Texas. A small town. HOA corruption exploding into federal fraud and possible murder was irresistible news. The courtroom overflowed, with people packed shoulder to shoulder and others watching from adjoining rooms. I caught sight of Dorothy Kim in the gallery, dressed in her best, giving me an encouraging nod. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Reeves," the bailiff called. Relief surged through me. Reeves had a reputation incorruptible, no patience for crooked judges. Harrison's reach would mean nothing here. As we sat, I saw Margaret being escorted in from a side door. Gone were her polished power suits, and now she wore an orange jumpsuit. Stripped of the authority she once wielded like a weapon, she looked smaller, almost fragile, and when her eyes met mine, I saw not a tyrant but a bitter woman hollowed out by decades of hatred. The sight was strangely satisfying. Elaine arose, her voice sharp and commanding. "Your Honor, what began as a simple property dispute has unraveled into a vast web of corruption involving multiple layers of local government. We have proof of embezzlement, racketeering, judicial misconduct, and potentially even murder." The Willowbrook Ranch HOA was nothing more than a criminal enterprise designed to steal property and enrich the defendants at the expense of the very community they claimed to serve. Elena clicked the remote, and the courtroom monitors lit up with evidence that left no room for doubt. "Over the past 10 years, she explained, the Willowbrook Ranch HOA collected more than $3 million in fines and fees. Roughly 40% of that money cannot be traced to legitimate expenses. Instead, it was funneled into shell corporations tied directly to Judge Harrison and his inner circle." Then came the audio. Robert's late-night recordings filled the courtroom, his weary voice confessing while Margaret's slurred tones carried the weight of cold malice. "The beauty of digitalis," Margaret drawled with wine-thick cruelty, "is that it mimics natural heart failure, a touch in his coffee every week, and eventually, the heart just gives out. No autopsy, no suspicion, just another old man with a weak ticker exactly as planned." Gasps rippled through the gallery. I clenched my fists beneath the table, forcing myself to remain expressionless. It was the first time I'd heard the unedited recording, and the casual evil in her voice left me chilled. Then the prosecutor's voice cut through the silence. "The prosecution calls Nathan Hayes." I rouse, walking with steady steps to the witness box. Raising my right hand, I locked eyes with Margaret. This was the moment I had been building toward since learning the truth. "Mr. Hayes," the prosecutor began, "please share your professional background with the court and explain why you are uniquely positioned to evaluate this case." I allowed the pause, then revealed my ace. "I am the executive director of the National HOA Oversight Division, a federal agency tasked with investigating and prosecuting HOA corruption nationwide. Over the past 15 years, I have overseen more than 200 successful prosecutions of HOA-related fraud and abuse." A ripple of shock spread across the defense table. Harrison's legal team, who had assumed I was just a bureaucrat with a grudge, suddenly realized I was the one who literally wrote the handbook on HOA corruption. Margaret's complexion drained to a ghastly white. "In your expert opinion," the prosecutor pressed, "how does the Willowbrook Ranch case compare to others you've handled?" I leaned forward, ensuring every word carried. "This is among the worst I've ever seen. The corruption here wasn't random, it was systematic. It involved not only HOA officials but members of the judiciary. They used fear, threats, and even murder to protect their scheme. Margaret Williams didn't just run a corrupt HOA, she operated a criminal syndicate." Cross-examination came next. Harrison's attorney, a predator named Pete, tried his best to tear me down. "Mr. Hayes," he sneered, "isn't it true you exploited your federal position to target my clients because of a personal vendetta?" I met his stare evenly. "No, sir, when your clients came after me, I was on vacation. I used no government resources until after their crimes escalated to property destruction, fraud, and intimidation. Every action I took was in direct response to their illegal behavior, nothing more." Pete encircled with more questions, but each line of attack collapsed against the overwhelming evidence. The true victory arrived when Judge Harrison himself was escorted into court, handcuffed, stripped of his robe, and charged with federal corruption. Watching the man who had once ruled the community with fear reduced to a criminal in shackles was more satisfying than I could have imagined. But Margaret's final words were the most damning. When given the chance to address the court before sentencing, she snapped. Turning toward me, her mask shattered. "You destroyed everything," she spat. "Just like your father destroyed my family's dreams. But at least I had the satisfaction of watching him die slowly and knowing it was because of me." Her open court confession sealed her fate. Judge Reeves's expression hardened as she delivered her ruling. "In my career, I have presided over countless cases, but rarely have I witnessed such deliberate cruelty. This conspiracy twisted the very foundation of justice. While the jury will determine guilt on the criminal charges, I am issuing immediate rulings on the civil matters. Every lien and violation issued during Margaret Williams's tenure is vacated. All properties wrongfully seized must be returned to their rightful owners or heirs, with full compensation for equity lost. This court refuses to let corruption bear fruit. The room erupted. Families wept, cheered, and embraced as they realized they were getting their home and their lives back. I kept my eyes on Margaret. The weight of her downfall pressed onto her shoulders. Her empire, built on intimidation and deceit, had collapsed in a single morning. As the bailiffs prepared to escort her away, she turned toward me. "This isn't over," she whispered. But the threat rang hollow now. Then my phone buzzed. A new message flashed across the screen. "Mr. Hayes, my name is Patricia Williams, HOA President in Colorado. We need help." Margaret Chen was my mentor. The battle for Willowbrook Ranch was finished, but it was clear the war against HOA corruption stretched far beyond Texas. 6 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of 1423 Willowbrook Court, keys heavy in my hand. The moving truck behind me carried what remained of Margaret and Robert Williams's lives. Bound for a small apartment in Houstona, the only place she could afford now with every asset frozen. Her legal bills were piling up, and the irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who had evicted so many families now faced eviction herself, while the man she tried to destroy was, quite literally, her landlord. "I still can't believe you bought it," Dorothy Kim said, cradling a potted rosebush. It was a cutting from her late grandmother's cherished Irish roses, revived and thriving once again. "Though I have to admit, it's fitting. Your grandmother always said the best revenge was a life well lived." I smiled as Margaret stepped out of the house for the last time. Prison had aged her 10 years in just 6 weeks. Her attorney had already warned her to prepare for a long sentence. She didn't look at me as she passed, but Robert did. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for letting me testify a broken bar, for helping me get immunity. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to make it right." He'd already begun working with federal investigators, his insider knowledge unraveling HOA corruption schemes across the state. "Everyone deserves a second chance," I told him. "Use yours wisely." When their car pulled away, followed by the moving truck, neighbors began trickling out of their home like survivors after a storm. The transformation in Willowbrook Ranch over the past 6 weeks was remarkable. Without Margaret's iron grip, life had returned. Garden gnomes popped up on lawns. Children's chalk drawings sprawled across driveways. Tom Bradley, in a small act of rebellion, had installed not 1 but 3 bird feeders. "So," Linda Thompson asked, joining the crowd, "what are you going to do with the house?" I looked at the immaculate structure that had once been Margaret's fortress of control. "I'm thinking of turning it into a community center, legal clinics, HOA education workshops, maybe even a resource library for homeowners dealing with board abuse. What do you all think?" Their enthusiastic cheers answered for me. Within minutes, volunteers were lining up with renovation ideas and program suggestions. The house that had symbolized oppression was about to become a beacon. That evening, we celebrated with a neighborhood barbecue in my grandmother's restored garden. The newly planted roses were small but healthy, rooted in soil that had been remediated and, according to Dorothy, spiritually cleansed. For the first time in years, Willowbrook Ranch was filled with laughter, music, and the smell of good food. Meanwhile, Judge Harrison's corruption trial loomed, with dozens of new charges filed as investigators pulled apart his sprawling network of crooked judges and developers. What had begun as a local battle was rippling across 3 states. As the sun sank behind string lights overhead, Elena found me. "The Attorney General called," she said. "They want to expand your division to give you the resources to take this fight national. Interested?" I looked around at my neighbors, my friends. "Can I work remotely? I've got a ranch to run and a community center to build." She laughed. "I think that can be arranged. Besides, Willowbrook Ranch is about to become a model for HOA reform, ground zero for the revolution." Later that night, I stood alone inside what would soon be the Margaret Williams Community Resource Center, holding a photograph of my father. He was young, hopeful, standing in front of the same building decades earlier, when he fought against corruption in its earliest form. "We got them, Dad," I whispered. "We finally got them all." My phone buzzed. For a split second, dread clenched my chest. But when I opened the message, I chuckled. Mr. Hayes, our board just voted to adopt your transparency reforms. We're also naming our new community garden after your father, though I suspect you already have more gardens than you can handle. By the way, is it true you bought your enemy's house? That's savage. We stan a petty king. It was Patricia Williams, the HOA president from Colorado. I saved her number. Already planning my next visit. Dorothy had been right. The best revenge really was a life well lived. But she left out the part where that life could include turning your enemy's stronghold into a symbol of hope. As I locked up the house and walked back toward the ranch, I could almost hear my grandmother's laughter on the breeze. The boy who'd once left home to fight HOA corruption in Washington had come full circle only to find it festering in his own backyard. And in defeating it, I discovered something better than revenge, a community restored, a purpose renewed, and a future built not on fear, but on justice. The war was over. The healing had begun. And somewhere in federal prison, Margaret Williams was finally learning what it meant to live under rules she couldn't bend, break, or weaponize. That, I thought, was true poetic justice.